Welcome to Cal's webinar today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us today. We will be starting at 4 p.m. We appreciate your attendance here today. We have a very exciting webinar. As you're entering, please feel free to let us know where you're joining from in the chat. Thank you for joining us today. And it's 4 p.m. We're going to get started. Hi there, I'm Althea Rowe, and we thank you for joining this 30-minute webinar in our Research to Policy, Critical Conversations in Language Education series. This year's theme is Technologically Mediated Learning in Multilingual Contexts. We are examining the impact of technological innovation on learning in multilingual settings with a particular focus on AI. Today's webinar is Improving Accessibility via Lexical Simplifications, and we will be speaking with Kai North. I'm joined today by Amy Burden and Kira Ballantyne. We are recording the webinar, and we will post the recording on our website after the event. Before we begin, please mute your microphone to avoid any interruptions. You can activate closed captioning by pressing the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. This event is provided as a public service. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed belong solely to the guest speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of our organization. Our panel comprises esteemed experts who work at the intersection of research, policy, and practice in language education, language access, and equity. You can learn more about them on the webinar's webpage. We will share the link in the chat. We encourage you to ask questions via the Q&A box throughout the call. We will answer as many as possible at the end of our discussion. It is an excellent opportunity to tap into the wealth of knowledge we are fortunate to have here today. Also, click the chat button at the bottom of your screen to share your thoughts and comments anytime. Try it out by letting us know where you're listening from today. I'm now going to pass the microphone to our facilitators.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Althea. My name is Kira Ballantyne. I'm the Vice President for Programs and Development at the Center for Applied Linguistics. I'm joined here by Amy Burden.
Hi, I'm Amy Burden. I am a Test Development Manager here at the Center for Applied Linguistics. We're joined by Dr. Kai North. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Since we've only got 30 minutes, I will jump right in if you don't mind. So the first question we wanted to pose to you was, what kinds of issues is your research aiming to solve?
Yeah, no problem at all. So my area of research is known as lexical simplification. Now, the idea of lexical simplification is that we train AI and machine learning models to go through a text and to identify which words within that text are quite difficult or complex or hard to understand for certain key target demographics. So think of, for instance, perhaps children with a second language, or adults with dyslexia or aphasia, or just people with just low levels of literacy in general. So once we've identified these words, we then automatically replace them with more easier to understand alternatives. Now, one of the main issues we have in this area of research, and this is a common problem throughout AI and machine learning, is a lack of data corresponding to our particular target demographics. For instance, a lot of the time we use data created by a more general populace rather than for the specific populace or demographic we're actually trying to simplify for. I think another problem as well is that often or not, we create these simplification systems and AI and machine learning models, but we don't actually talk to the students or to the teachers who are trying to aid in the development of these systems. A lot of the time, we rely on automated evaluation metrics, which are kind of a good judge or a good gauge on performance, but they don't really tell us as if what we're doing or what we're simplifying, is it worthwhile? Is it a good idea, or is it even worth doing? So yeah, they're the two main issues, I would say, in terms of lexical simplification: the lack of data sets and the lack of human evaluation as well.
So Kai, I think it's important to share with our audience. You're primarily a computer scientist
I
by
am, yes.
training, right? Could you share a little bit just about your own background and your training, and how where you got to and how you come from this research? Because I love that you're joining us today, because I think your background is quite different from some of the folks that Cal usually speaks with.
Yeah, no problem at all. So my background is kind of a mix between applied linguistics and language learning, educational technology, and mainly computer science and machine learning as well. So I recently got my PhD from George Mason University in Virginia, whereby I specialize again mainly in lexical simplification, but also in terms of general educational technology and mostly as well assessment technologies as well. So automated essay scoring, predicting how difficult a question is, or a multiple choice question is for a student too. Yeah, so that's mainly my background. Yeah.
So I really appreciate that on this webinar, we're able to bring together that perspective with, I think a lot of folks in our audience are probably working directly within educational systems as teachers, as administrators. And so could you talk about from your view, from your perspective, how is that lexical simplification technology evolving? What kinds of changes have you seen over the past years in ways that it might support, for example, multilingual students, students with disabilities, adults with lower literacy, and other kinds of populations?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think one of the main takeaways from the research we're doing is that the simplification needs of one individual are not going to be the same for another individual. And past researchers normally approach this task of simplifying text, making them more accessible for these demographics, making text more readable for them in a way that's more holistic, that's more general, looking at the general populace. So in terms of the way the field has changed over the last couple of years, is we're more looking at on the personal level, on the individual level. And of course, some of you may be familiar with ChatGPT, which just came out last year, and that's definitely revolutionized and changed the way we approach this task. A lot more people are finding it a little bit more interesting. We're using now more powerful AI than what we were used to. So there is a lot of innovation in terms of overall performance as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So could you give us maybe some examples of like a specific, tell a story. Tell us a story about a potential specific application that you have seen, or that you might use this technology for some of those populations that our audience might work with.
Yeah, no worries at all. So one of the things we do look into, and I can give you two examples. Maybe the first one's more relevant, I'm not too sure, but one of the things we do is we want to simplify text, not to kind of remove the kind of originality of that text, but so as to provide it as a reference so that the student can use that simplified version to better understand the original document or text. So to give you an example, we sometimes work with like Shakespearean extracts. In the UK, we're often, taught Shakespeare. It may be the same in the US, I'm not too sure. But obviously, students will come to Shakespearean extracts. There's a lot of old, archaic vocabulary there. It'd be quite difficult to understand. So rather than simplifying it and then just giving them a simplified version and getting rid of the original, which is not what we're doing, we want to provide them with the simplified version so they can use it as reference to better understand the original document and say, okay, well, this word means this. This is the different context it can be used in as well, and so forth. Another area of research we're looking into in terms of use cases and how this can be used in the real world. And again, this might be a little bit less relevant perhaps, but a lot of the time there are people who are home caregivers in a medical setting. They're looking after a loved one, but the medical documents they have are very full of jargon, are quite complex. So we want to reduce that complexity of this medical terminology of these documents so that they can understand them a bit better and therefore look after their loved one a bit better as well. But yeah, that's just a few examples. Yeah.
I'm curious, and I think I've seen it go through the chat as well. What are some future applications for readers who may have disabilities such as dyslexia?
Yes, definitely. So that's another thing we'd like to work into. And I can give you another example, perhaps not a dyslexia example, but some people who may have who's slightly neurodivergent, perhaps, and they struggle with figurative language, for instance, like figurative expressions in job postings is another area we look at, or just in text in general. So we want to simplify these figurative expressions, give them more of a literal meaning, or replace them with more literal words. So then the text is less confusing for that person who suffers from the disability, which doesn't allow them to understand figurative expressions as well. But yeah, in terms of dyslexia, we also, create simplifiers for people suffering from dyslexia too, just trying to make the text more easier to understand for them and more accessible. Yeah.
And could you share with us, where are we in this tech, right? Because I know that as we think about the research and development process for new technologies, right, you sort of go from the kernel of an idea to a proof of concept to development sort of for the real world. So are there currently real world products and applications that have been tested, or are we more in the research and development stage here? Where does this tech sit in regard to, could I pick up the phone and order it right now, or what's the...
Yes, so I'd say it's still pretty much in the early development. In terms of real world applications, there are some, but not a lot. We do work with one startup company who were looking into simplifying job posts for, and I think it was for speakers, Spanish first language speakers who were learning to speak English. And they were trying to find employment in the US. So we were simplifying texts and job advertisements for them so that they can find their job a little bit more easier, perhaps. But yeah, so in terms, and again, I might be going off the ball here a little bit, but in terms of where we are at, simplification of English documents is quite, I wouldn't say it's solved, but with the release of ChatGPT and other large language models, newer generative AI, this task has become a lot more easier, and that's particularly for English. However, for other languages, for instance, Spanish, the performances are somewhat good, but to get into more low-resourced languages or language varieties, we do a lot of work with Brazilian Portuguese. Performances aren't as great as they would be for a more heavily resourced language, for instance, English. So one of the areas of research we want to look into is to reverse that. We want to make it more so that we have all the languages, maybe not all of them, but all the under-resourced languages into the mix and get the performances good on them. Yeah.
And what's involved in doing that? How do you actually do the research? How do you go from, this system doesn't know how to do this to, gosh, it's getting kind of good at it?
Yeah, no problem. So I think it all comes back to human evaluation and getting data from the people we're trying to create these systems for. So one of the first things we do, for instance, if we're going to look at Brazilian Portuguese, is to gather a data set which has been annotated by people with low literacy in Brazil. And this could be related to, they rate how difficult that a particular word is within a text, normally on a linkage scale between 0 and 5, 0 being very easy, 5 being very difficult. But they also provide a word which is a lot more easier to understand, what they find easier to understand as well. And then once we have this data, we can then train our AI model to make predictions based on this data and therefore kind of replicate what the human annotator said at the beginning. In terms of the evaluations, we just compare the predictions from the AI model and we compare that to what the original annotators said. But going back to what I said earlier, one of the main issues what we have is that we're not actually assessing the quality of the simplification at the end there. We're just comparing the initial rating. We're not having someone who coming in and say, okay, I find this very good or I find this very bad. So the extra layer of evaluation is needed. Yeah.
You mentioned a moment ago something about assessment. Now, as a test development manager, I perked up a good bit at that. Could you tell me a bit more about the connection between the research and the work that you're doing and assessment?
Yeah, no problem. So this might not be related to directly like automated predicting of how good an essay is, say, but rather of how difficult an essay is. For instance, one of the components of lexical simplification, which is the first component, is predicting how difficult certain elements within that text are. And then obviously we simplify it. But what we can do is we get that difficulty prediction element, then we apply it to how difficult essays might be for students. If there's more complex vocabulary in there, perhaps it's more, going to be more difficult for a particular individual. So there is that connection to assessment. But in terms of like evaluating, providing them a score on how good the answer is to their question, not so much on that front. Yeah, but we might be able to, later on.
Some of the concern that I have heard about using AI, particularly in assessment, has been around bias. Can you speak at all to how the research you're doing would either eliminate or decrease bias, or what concerns should users have?
Yeah, no problem at all. So from what I understand, bias normally comes from, well, it's embedded within the training set. If you have a training set which contains data representative of a certain view, that's then going to be learned by the AI model, and then also predicted by the AI model. So that bias is going to maintain. So the way you eliminate that, through my opinion, again, I'm not, take it with a pinch of salt, but would be to have data which is more inclusive, to have annotations from different demographics, which is more representative of what you're getting. And then hopefully that will mitigate bias by a bit, hopefully. Yes, yeah. I hope that answers your question there.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to that. I appreciate it.
I'm going to pull a question from the chat. We've got a really robust set of questions in the chat going. So I think we'll have time to pull quite a lot of them in. And I'm really glad because, as I said earlier, this really is, of all the webinars that we've had, I feel like this is really a synthesis of the viewpoints of our audience and the expertise that our guest brings, which are from quite different professional traditions. So I'm really glad to kind of get this discourse going. But so here is a question that this person asks, what kind of lexicon is being simplified? So I guess thinking about what are the inputs that you're using into the training and how are you selecting them?
Yeah, no problem. So in terms of lexical simplification, by that all we mean is just like word level simplification. So in terms of what we simplify, what words we simplify, this normally is related to the words that our target demographic find difficult. And this could vary entirely, completely dependent on the individual. For instance, I mentioned earlier about the simplification of medical documents. In that case, we want to simplify certain words, but we definitely don't want to simplify everything, because there's going to be stuff in a medical document which needs to stay there. For instance, symptoms, diagnosis, stuff like this, very important stuff we don't want to remove or simplify or replace. Instead, in that particular situation, we want to simplify more of the general everyday vocabulary that someone with low literacy might struggle with a little bit, but maintain the more medical related terms. So it does have that benefit still. But yes, just to kind of sum up, it really does depend on the individual there, and what they need to be.
And that input is it as the input is selected by the individual, is the technology then generalizing from that individual to what it will do next? And I think this is a second part of this person's question is, do you do that differently for different audiences or different populations that might use this technology?
Yes, so there's two answers to that question. We can do it the fully automated way. So we can train an AI on data which has been selected by an individual. And if that individual says, or for instance, has a problem with a certain, category of words or something like that, or has an issue with like a certain genre or vocabulary, perhaps, if you understand, like if I'm saying that correctly, then obviously that AI model will learn that and be able to simplify accordingly. Another approach, what we could do is we could implement some rules in our system. So we can say, okay, only simplify X, Y, Z types of words, or simplify everything. So it really does depend on what we're making. Sometimes the AI can learn that, or we could just manually tell it what to learn and what not to do as well. Yeah.
You may have already spoken to this, but I'm curious, would this software then be for individual use, or would this simplify a text for an entire group of readers?
Yeah, so previous systems normally do on a generalized scale. So normally produce it for a generalized audience, but
Right.
we're more looking into the personalized aspect of it. So for instance, it could be multilingual speakers of two particular languages. A lot of the work we look into is English first language, Spanish second language, or Brazilian Portuguese, English second. So yeah, at the moment it's going more in the personalized, whereas in the past it was more general.
Right. That's fascinating.
We also have a question around the point that you alluded to earlier about the figurative language in those job postings, right? Which, as we all know, sometimes is harder to access for folks that are coming from a second language or even from a different culture in the same language, right? And so the question is, are you automating the identification of the figurative language?
Yes, so that's something we're working into now. It's like a two-step challenge, so to speak. So the first task would be to automatically identify figurative expressions within the job posting or within the text. And this is what could be referred to as a span detection task. So we want to identify when the figurative expression begins and when it ends. And then once we've identified them, then we can then classify them and how difficult they are for the reader. And then we can provide simplified alternatives as well. So it is going to be almost several tasks kind of bundled into one. The identification of the expression, the rating of how difficult that expression is, and then the simplification of that expression. But that being said, not to go on too much, but that being said, obviously with large language models and the GPT series models now, there is a chance that you could do all that in one step, rather than having three separate. But I could go on about that, and I think, yeah.
I have another question, and then maybe I'll let you pick it. I'll let you pick one after that. But so this person is really sort of drilling down and thinking about the potential application and asking, could you share? You've tried to produce simplified text, for example, for this particular grade level of students or this particular level of language proficiency acquisition. Are you there yet? Are you at that level of granularity yet in terms of validating this in its use for students or other individuals that might use it?
Yeah, no problem. So I would confidently say for English, we're practically there, especially with the arrival of the new large language models and new AI. They're very good at often simplifying English texts without much real engineering there. But for other languages, that's still definitely a work in progress. It does rely mainly on lack of data and lack of human evaluation as well. So yeah, definitely there for English, not so much for other languages, unfortunately, but that's what we want to work on. Yeah.
I think from the chat, there was a few questions regarding the types of languages and how the lexical simplification interacts with them. Is the assumption that it would be English simplified for Spanish speakers? Is there Spanish simplified for English speakers? Is there a reversal on any of these?
Yes, definitely. So sorry, I think my webcam may be going a bit faulty there. I don't know if that's coming out. I think it's better. Okay, so yes.
Thank you.
Sorry
Yeah,
about
it's
that.
better now.
Yeah. So yes, it can be both ways. So we have done some research, obviously, for Spanish first language, English second. But we also do a lot for, say, and I think there's been a lot of research done for English first, Chinese second, and also English first, Japanese second. So yeah, it can work both ways. It depends. Also, I think the performances of the systems we develop. For instance, if you develop on languages which are very similar, like Spanish, perhaps French is somewhat similar compared to, say, French versus Japanese, which is very different. Then you can kind of almost train a model on languages which are familiar and then kind of utilize that as well. So yeah, sorry, it goes both ways. Yes. So English first, Spanish second, or vice versa. And we also do a lot of work with Brazilian Portuguese as well. Yeah.
Excuse me. I see a comment that I also want to elevate. So this comment says that, we have to also make sure that we don't rely wholly on these AI and technological solutions. You know, we have to, particularly as we are thinking about language learning, you know, making the nice point that this is a tool for communication, but obviously, you know, is supplemented, is a support for, you know, the core of language learning, if that's the enterprise that the student is involved in. So Kai, you know, do you see kind of overstatements or over promises of the promise of this kind of technology? Like, where would you caution people to kind of, hey, rein it in, it can do great things, but it can't yet do that?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good question, actually. Yeah, I like that. So I think for me, and then again, this is my own opinion. I agree with that. I think people do need to be aware that there are limits to AI. At the moment, there is large hype, very popular. There's a lot of expectations, but in reality, those expectations, you know, sometimes fall a little bit short. So in terms of what I do with the simplification side of things, and this kind of we're trying to change this now, I think, in the field, but a lot of the time we rely solely on automated metrics to evaluate the performance of our systems, you know, whereas in reality, we should be asking students and the people we're developing these things for, like, hey, does this actually, you know, meet your needs, or is it actually beneficial? So there may be a disconnect there between what our system is producing and what the actual real world requirements are. And I think moving forward, there needs to be more of like that discussion, more of that collaboration from people from different kind of backgrounds to get involved there and trying to figure out how we can best utilize this AI. Yeah.
Sounds like another dissertation topic for somebody there. Somebody has asked if is a demo of this tool available? Can folks in the audience see it in action? Or I also have some folks asking if there are any examples of sort of side-by-side original and simplified texts that they might be able to look at.
Yeah, definitely. So I might be able to find some for you and perhaps share them with you later on. But so I've recently graduated from my PhD several months ago. So I need to get in contact with my old supervisor to see how things are going in terms of production. But yeah, there may be no promises at this stage, but there might be. Yeah, I will be able to provide simplified text versus original, though. That's something we could do. Yeah.
So we have a teacher question here, and I'm not sure, Kai, that I don't mean to put you on the spot.
It's
and I
okay.
think you're absolutely,
I'll try my best.
You're absolutely within bounds to say, actually, this is not my professional competence and the teachers need to ask this one. This is the question. As a teacher of a language other than English, what would you suggest that I do to help students read more complex second language text via simplification? How would I go about it?
Yeah, no worries. I'll give you my best answer there. It may not be correct, but I think what I would do is I would provide perhaps a simplified version of the text we're trying to get your students to learn next to the original. Perhaps that might help them out so they can look at the simplified version and then just trying to gauge from that simplified version what the original means. Because what we're doing with lexical simplification is we're only going to replace those words which are difficult. There is another field of research called text simplification, which kind of, or text summarization, which actually kind of rewrites the entire text so that it's actually quite different. Whereas what we're doing is we're only going to be replacing a word here and there just to try and make it a little bit more easier. And we hope that would aid their vocabulary development because they might see a word that they're familiar with in the same position as the word they're struggling with. And they'll be like, oh, okay, this means this. But you know, again, I lack in terms of teaching experience, so I'm not I'm not 100% sure if that helps.
and I think actually for me, the question that I have to those of us who are educators and administrators is, you know, once you see what the technology can do, what are our professional responsibilities in understanding then how that applies to the classroom? Because I think we have this shared responsibility here, right? So Kai, thank you so much for you know, explaining to us what the technology does and what its limits are and what it, you know, what we don't know about it. Because I think then, you know, we have to collaborate across our disciplines. And so having, you know, these good conversations about, yeah, this is what we know, you know, this bit we're not really sure about yet. So now let's not overstate the claims. But you know, when we bring these multiple pieces of different disciplinary professional lenses, then we get to a place where we can solve some problems. So
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And thank you for having me as well. It's been great talking to you guys. Yeah.
I think the last question then would be, what would you say are a call to action or a next step for our audience? What should they do after listening to you talk about research?
I think it's just more collaboration, really. I think, with the advances in AI, it is kind of a cool time to see what these models can do, but we definitely need to be cautious in terms of their actual reliability and what they're saying. Is it genuine? And, what our simplifiers are doing is actually worthwhile and beneficial. So yeah, we definitely need that aspect of just more discussion, really, and just trying to figure out the best way to go forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. I thoroughly agree. Collaboration between the classroom and the research, that's what we need. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. A big thank you to Kai for being with us here today. It looks like this is all the time we have for this webinar. I'd like to thank our awesome panelists as well, Amy and Kira. Thank you all for this very engaging conversation. Thank you again, the audience, for being here. We look forward to seeing you in the next one, and please watch your emails for the recording. Bye.